Hi, it's Karen Binns from Hi-Fi, and I have been honored, and I can't even believe my luck, that I have the one and only Hetty Mahlich, editor of Show Studio. You want to talk about levels? Let's talk about levels, okay? We're talking about fashion film. We are talking about probably the most important platform for talent on the planet. Can I say that with confidence?
I mean, I think so. Firstly, thank you for having me. I mean, it's all got to be put, really. I can't take any credit for the amazing things Show Studio does, really. I mean, it's all Nick Knight, who founded it in 2000. And I feel so privileged to be able to be a part of Show Studio. I've been there for 5 years this summer.
Has it been 5 years already?
Yeah, I mean, I started there as an intern, which I think
Did I meet you when you were an intern? Oh
yeah.
My God.
I mean, I think we'll go into that's kind of testament to the place that it is. Nick is so open-armed with everyone, and it's a place where you go and you get stuck into everything and you learn, and it's a pretty magic place.
How long have you been an editor there now?
2 years? 2 years, yeah. Coming up 2 years this Christmas, it'll be 2 years. Yeah.
I have to say, every time I see Hetty, she's usually booking me to go on Show Studio and go in. So today I'm gonna ask Hetty to go in on whatever is possible. No, but it's always a vibe. It's always a vibe when I see Hetty. She always has something to say, and she's saying something that matters. And I thought it would be great to have her just to sit down for a minute and try to go over, the real importance of support, especially support with young, new, emerging talent. And, over the years, I've noticed how, Show Studio through Nick Knight has opened arms to so many people. And I'm not talking about people that are already on the map, that already have receipts, or, that already have tracks. These are kids that are just coming up. And I've just noticed over the last, I guess, since you've been editor, no shade, but since you've been editor, there's a lot more voices that I hear from much, much younger people in the industry that are just starting out, just finding their way, How did that start? Like, how did you guys come up with that idea of and I'm talking about the panel discussions on fashion, getting their voice heard as far as seeing what fashion is going, or just their, opinions. I mean, how did that all start? Like, are you in charge of doing that type of casting for the panel discussions?
Yeah, I mean, that's a massive part of my role. I mean, we kind of do them seasonally with Fashion Week, but then kind of peppered through the year as well. And that's a big part of my job, is to decide what we want to talk about, who we want to host them. You've kindly hosted many for us over the years, who we want to be on those panels. So yeah, that's a massive part of what I do. And I think that element of curating and bringing people together is really something that Show Studio is really good at. And that's definitely something that Nick wants it to be, as a place where different people can come together and have conversations, and have open conversations that don't have any agenda behind them. I think that's something really key about what Show Studio does, is there's no kind of ulterior motive or agenda, and I think that's definitely a problem in the industry. And I do see it as kind of a little oasis away from everything else.
I mean, I see it as a support mechanism to young people who, when I say young, I mean people who aren't on a level of extreme professionalism or haven't made it yet, but they're coming up. They're trying to find their way. I also want to talk about the young talent that you guys are allowed to have on Show Studio. How do you feel about the importance of supporting young talent through such a huge platform?
I think it's really important, and I think it's important in the sense of creating a creative space. I don't think there's enough spaces where creatives, whether you're a designer or an image maker, a filmmaker, a graphic designer, so many kind of disciplines. I don't think there's enough spaces where, again, it comes back to this idea of agenda where you can go and create something for creation's sake that isn't for some, you know, some kind of other kind of ulterior motive or someone's telling you it has to look a certain way or be a certain way. So I think it's really important to have more of those spaces that aren't just within kind of the education space. I mean, a lot of the people that we work with will be students who are still in education, but I think you kind of leave this place of education where you can create an experiment, and then it suddenly becomes so hard to do that. You know, there's so many things that come into that, from resources and cost and all of those things. And I think what we are able to do is to offer a space where we can collaborate with people that we think are seeing things in new ways, and give them a space where they can create something that is going to be seen on a wider platform. And hopefully what that does, and what it does do, is exposes people to future collaborators, to future opportunities. For us, it definitely comes from, you know, a selfish place where we just want to create with people that we find really exciting. So it's great to be able to offer that to people where we can say kind of, you know, we're always quite loose in our briefs with people. If we find them exciting, Nick will kind of sit down with them and say, you know, I love your work, this is what I'm interested in at the moment, what are you interested in? And it always comes quite organically in that way. It's never so much of a kind of set brief and a set of objectives. It's kind of come into the space and make it your own. Like, one of my favorite projects we do is live studio, where we literally will give the studio to, usually it's a designer, but we're kind of increasingly looking at doing that with artists as well. But we'll kind of give it to them for 3 days. A big thing that we do is live streaming. So we'll have all the cameras on and they will create, say, a piece of clothing over 3 days. And you'll be able to firstly tune in on the website and watch that happen. So it's a great education tool to actually open up what happens, what goes into creating a garment, all that you'll see, all the people that work on that. It's not just one person. And then Nick will kind of shoot it at the end. So it's kind of that whole process from kind of concept to creation. So that's like one of my favorite things, where it's literally like, this is your studio now, make it your own, and also show other people what that process is while we're at it, which, yeah, I love that project.
Because that is a form of giving back as well. How is it that you guys can actually afford to do that? Because that's quite costly. Is there a space where you're getting any help from the government or anything like that that allows you to give back so freely?
No, we don't. We're not kind of involved with any kind of grants from the government. I mean, it's always been Nick's absolute passion project. You know, he started it in 2000 because he wanted a space to primarily to show fashion film, but also to kind of have the freedom to work creatively and to kind of, I think he was so excited, you know, by the internet at that point. The internet was so in its early stages, you know, like having a fashion website was not a thing.
Yeah,
like,
sure enough, exactly.
Yeah.
Is it the first one?
Yeah.
I think it is the first one, yeah.
He'll tell you funny stories where he's like, people just thought he was mad. They were like, why would you want to have fashion on the web? What's that?
Yeah, what's that? Yeah, exactly.
So for him, it's always been kind of just part of his work. It's an extension of Nick as a creative, and yeah, it all kind of comes from, without Nick, there would be no show studio. So yeah, that's kind of how we keep going as Nick. Both.
What inspired you to become the editor?
So I mean, I kind of grew up watching Show Studio, and it was a massive resource tool for me. I did an art foundation at Kingston, where you kind of do a bit of everything, specialised in fashion communication, but I was really kind of lost. I knew I liked making stuff with my hands, but I knew I didn't want to be a designer. I knew I wanted to communicate things, but I was quite visceral in how I wanted to do that, and I remember kind of finishing foundation and everyone started going off to do their kind of BAs and things like that, and I was like, I don't know where I want to go, and I think it was around that time I started watching Show Studio, and I started watching the panels, but then I started seeing kind of all the very kind of multimedia different projects going on. Anyway, this was kind of, it was always kind of there. I went off, ended up doing history of art. I left London for a bit. I was lucky to grow up in London, but I left for a bit, went off and did that. And then I came back to London, and I remember that summer being like so lost of just like, what do I want? What do I want to do? I was really lucky that I went home to live with my parents who live in London. So I was able to be in London. And I remember like just applying to a load of places. Like I wasn't sure if I wanted to be like a journalist. I applied to newspapers and things like that. And I applied to Show Studio, didn't hear anything. And then I was on Instagram one day and saw someone posted being like, Show Studio looking for an intern. And I was like, oh, that sucks. Like I applied and nothing happened, but I'll just send another application. Anyway, so I sent one and I literally got a call back like an hour later. And it's funny because I then got to know the person that did the hiring at the time, and she was like, yeah, we never saw your first application. So that's definitely like a lesson to just like resend
You
it.
resend it.
But I remember the reason that I decided to apply was I just thought, looking at Show Studio, I was like, it's got all these things that I like. It's got writing, it's got, you know, Nick, you know, one of the most amazing fashion photographers and image makers in the world, but also lots of different people just doing lots of things. And I knew that I didn't want to just be one thing, and I also didn't know what that one thing was. I mean, I must have been like 20, 21 at this point. And I think that's something I still really feel strongly about now, is that I think there's such a pressure to have a label. Everyone's, you know, wants to be a creative director or a designer or this or that. And I think
getting a little out of control.
Yeah, and we can talk about that. It's another thing. But I think that's what appealed to me about Show Studio as a whole, was that I felt like there were so many different elements I could get stuck into. So I definitely started on kind of the editorial team, doing a lot of writing. But as I say, kind of Nick is like all hands-on approach. You can get stuck in, so you can assist on the set. You know, we're all in this space, so it's like you can go and see what the film directors are working on, the graphic designers. You can go and see all those different elements that go into like making a fashion image or a live stream conversation. And I just like fell so in love with it, and kind of worked my way up. And then Nick asked me to be the editor. Nearly a year and a half, 2 years ago. And it was kind of something that I didn't even know was on the table. I kind of, there wasn't anyone else doing that role, and there hadn't been in my time. And
there hasn't? Oh.
There hadn't while I'd been there. The editor role kind of had been kind of vacant for a few years.
Right.
So I hadn't even really kind of thought it was there. And then, Nick offered it to me, and it was like an absolute yes. I was so excited about it. And I think why I was excited about it was I've definitely moved away from I don't see myself as a writer anymore.
Oh, right, really?
I mean, I do. It's definitely a skill set that I have and I love doing, and I like love writing. But I think Show Studio and Nick have shown me that you don't have to be just one thing. You can, and
you might get multi-hyphen.
And that you can, if you enjoy kind of image making and storytelling and all of these things, kind of, you can be involved in lots of different parts of that process to bring it together. You don't have to just be tunneled into one thing. And I love in my role that I get to work with so many different people across lots of different areas, but also kind of give my input to those areas as well. It's not just about bringing people together. It's also about having that opportunity to kind of say what I see and what I think would be good, and listening to other people. I think it's I've always thought about, I remember there being a period of thinking, because it was kind of my job out of school, you know, it was like I did the interning thing growing up a lot while I was growing up in London, but I hadn't done the kind of jumping from company to company thing.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
And I wouldn't even really call Show Studio a company, really, because I think it's not that corporate. But I remember thinking, God, where would I go if like Show Studio wasn't around? And I still couldn't answer you that, because I don't think there's anywhere like it. So it's such a privilege to kind of do the editor role there.
How do, this is another interesting question. How do you actually find the young talent that you bring in? Like, how do you decide who to give a voice to?
I think in terms of kind of practically, I think that comes from, I think social media is like a massive thing that, Nick is kind of on his phone constantly just trying to finding people.
Really?
Wow. Me too, and we're kind of sending each other people. I think that's something also is like Nick doesn't care about the credentials of someone. It's visually, if he instinctually finds what someone's doing exciting, he'll just start DMing them on Instagram and talking to them, or people DM him and he answers them.
Oh, wow.
And it's same for like me. If I see someone, I'll send it to Nick, and if he finds them exciting. So I think that's kind of a very basic level way of kind of just coming across people and finding people. And I think that's a good way to look outside of the kind of system.
Right.
Because on the flip side, then the other side is kind of looking within education, the graduates. We've done a couple of projects kind of in COVID. We did a project called Class of 2020, and then we did it the following year where we did like an online showcase for all the graduating students, because obviously they didn't have their shows or anything. And that was like one of my favorite projects to work on.
Oh, really?
Because it was just like, sifting through all of these students and putting like hundreds of them on the website. And I think that's a great place to kind of to look for people. But I do think there is a problem where education is kind of shrinking in terms of who is being allowed into that kind of pool of talent. So I think it's important to, see who's doing their own thing. On Instagram, has got their own page and things like that, because I'm careful not to kind of just be like, who's graduated from CSM?
Yeah,
Let's
right.
just
That's
do
a
them.
little bit like,
I think it's really important to not just get pulled into that.
Do you go to the graduate shows and you see people and you choose them from there?
And it's been good. I've kind of got to the point now where I've built up relationships with kind of, like Adam, who's at Ravensbourne, and all the different kind of course leaders at Westminster and CSM, and also, that Class of 2020 project, that was kind of all across the UK. So it was like Anglia, all of the tiny universities. And then the year after we expanded it internationally, so did some international schools as well.
It's outside of the UK now.
Yeah, and it wasn't as big as we wanted it to be, but it was as big as we managed to get it to be at that point. But that's also, doing projects like that enables you to kind of build out that kind of contact list and start to kind of make those connections. I think that's something that's really important to Nick, is that we're not just kind of a London-centric thing.
Right.
That's important, I think. I think growing up in London as well, it's easy to just think you're in this bubble of London or, any kind of major fashion capital. And I think something we've really been working on the last couple of years especially is being more conscious of broadening beyond that, especially because there's now, being able to even live in London as a young creative is like more expensive than it's ever been before. So I think you have to remember who's making it through to be able to afford to have an internship in London and all those things.
Right. You're right.
So I think that's important for us when we're looking at talent as well, is to actually be like, wait, where have you come from? Have you just graduated from CSM? Because that's not a reason to say no, but also we need to make sure we're balancing that with enough people that are from outside of that,
Do you look for certain talents that they have, or you just feel they have a great aesthetic, or how is it usually balanced out? Is it talent-based, raw talent-based, or is it other things?
I think initially it comes from like an impulse or talent kind of visual thing. But then I think it also comes from conversation and just talking to people and gauging where these kind of visuals or whatever it is comes from, and just kind of getting a sense of that person and those things. I think to do like a project with someone, I think you've got to creatively be able to have conversations and connect in a certain way. So that's definitely like, we never promise anything before we've had a conversation with people, because you want to be like, well, can we create something exciting together?
Have you, I guess, have had the opportunity to work with an artist that you've chosen on Show Studio?
trying to think, definitely have, but I get mind blank.
We can go back to that question. We can go back to, is there anyone that you'd like to name that you feel has come through Show Studio and because of that has a career today? And this is of course on the back of Show Studio support.
I mean, I think it's really interesting looking back through archive, like Show Studio projects, like even going back to kind of In Fashion, which is like an interview project we do.
Yeah.
There was like, this is way beyond, way like before I started, but it was kind of one of the reasons I loved Show Studio. There's this kind of group of interviews which are kind of from the period of kind of Jonathan Anderson, Simone Rocha, Molly Goddard, when they were really, really young, kind of only a couple of years into their brand, and there's interviews with all of them. And I find it really interesting looking back at that, because now you're like, oh, these are kind of some of the designers of kind of London's kind of generation of kind of greats. But looking back at that time, they were super, super young. So that's quite interesting. I think in terms of, there's been some great projects which I've got to work on. Fantastic Trials with Nazir.
Yeah, I mean, like you had me on Show Studio speaking to him. I mean, I think what he's doing is just incredible. And at the same time, having him there as a voice was next level. It was like so many people came back to me on DM saying, oh my God, I can't believe we finally heard what Nessie has to say.
Yeah.
Is there another way that you actually support him or help him with Fantastic Twirls? Like, is there something that he does with Show Studio, or is there a movement of collaboration or anything like that?
What was really nice was, so we did a shoot with them, Nick did a shoot with them.
Yeah. I think I remember that, yeah.
Then we gave them the studio for a weekend to do their pop-up shop.
Right.
Which was, I think we all really liked seeing the space be used as a way where actually designers could, it was benefiting them in not just a creative way where they could kind of have a space to, they were obviously selling, but to kind of be together and people, you know, random people came to the shop, it was great. But to kind of, you know, this was a free space where they could then just focus on kind of making money from what they make and getting all of that money. And that's what's so amazing about what Nazir has done with Fantastic Twirls. But yeah.
How do you feel about, and I know I keep on asking you all these questions, because I just know you have so much knowledge, Hetty, and I don't think enough people know, enough people hear it. How do you feel about your relationship with the colleges, like as a whole, as far as support? Like, what do you feel is necessary or needed, or you feel that's missing
I
support?
I think it's necessary to give, to kind of, I think it's really important to have those connections with the universities where you can kind of see what's coming out. And I think it's, I mean, I've just started teaching at Central St. Martin's.
Oh, have you?
Yeah,
oh
doing
my God.
a little bit of teaching, which is, I mean, that Class of 2020 project was one of my favorite projects I've ever worked on, because I think once you actually start having proper conversations with the students, I think that's when it gets really interesting. I think it's important to kind of, to have a space where, you know, we'll kind of work with the universities where they might have a final end of year project, and we will put that on the website maybe as part of an article, and we'll do a highlight of some of the students and like a handful, and we'll say to them, you know, can you give us just a short summary of your project and things like that. So that's kind of smaller ways that I've tried to continue giving them a slight showcase space without doing this massive project every year. So we definitely have conversations with all of the kind of course leaders as their kind of end of year projects come, whether that's second year or final year, where we'll say, they'll kind of let us know what they're working on, and we'll try and do kind of articles or small spotlight things like that. But I do think it's important to have those, to try and have those more direct conversations with the students. Like me teaching at CSM now, even though that is just one kind of major uni and doesn't include all the others, it's definitely enabled me to have way more kind of close conversations with the students and understand better where they're coming from, where their kind of heads are at, what the kind of consciousness is and consensus, because then that informs me going back to the studio and saying to Nick kind of, this is what I think, feels exciting, or, this is kind of what kind of maybe would be helpful to them, but also might be more informative, kind of what you find interesting. And, like, for example, I think a massive thing which is kind of not what it used to be is the research. I think like the younger, a lot of younger students, I don't think quite kind of engage with the research process as they used to. So like that's something I'm thinking is like, could we do, more projects which are based on that or something like that? It's there's it kind of.
But you're saying as your role.
Yeah, you can start thinking about, I think it's all about dialogue and a two-way thing. I think that's so much about Show Studio is about having a dialogue and a two-way thing with people, whether that's young talent or a general audience. So I think when we're doing projects, it's always about not just let us find someone exciting and do something with them and show it. It's like, how can we have a dialogue with them and also with the audience to kind of say something new or teach something? I think that's really important.
I mean, I see Show Studio as, such a jump-off platform for so many people. At the same time, I know, like you say, no one's giving him money to do it. He's doing it off the back of however you guys are doing it, which is what Hi-Fi has been doing for a while. And Liam's the founder, and evidently he's been doing this for so long, and we've never spoke about it. It is slightly different from what you do, and it is a facility which allows young talent that can't afford to do their first presentation or their first film, whatever. We come up with the whole game for them. We have the studio, we have the set designer, we have the stylist, we have it all here. And what we do is we try to give them an opportunity to show a collection or whatever they're doing at least once very well before they get possibly, from anything from New Gen to, Lulu's initiative, which we all know and love. And it's just so difficult for them to even get in the door to even see these people, And if we can help them at least get into the door, that for us is becoming a part of this machine of support, and since 2000, that's a long time.
Yeah.
We're in 2024 and you guys are banging. So it's like, and there's so much talent that's coming out. I'm just trying to think if there was one in particular that you can think of that's a fashion film maker that has actually come through the ranks of Show Studio.
I think, Nick's assistant used to be Ruth Hogben, who is like an amazing Ruth Hogben.
Ruth Hogben, yeah.
Who's kind of an incredible fashion filmmaker. I mean, Nick always says to any new filmmakers that come through now, he's like, go and watch Ruth's films. So she's definitely like an incredible person who's gone through the ranks. I mean, there's just so many designers and makers and image makers who've gone through Show Studio.
Yeah, it is, yeah.
I think so many people in the industry that make it up now, if you look at their resumes, they would have gone through
probably
Show Studio.
More than 75% of the industry, yeah.
Totally.
I mean, I think there's so many platforms that charge, that don't give chances to people who aren't already there. And I just think that I've come together and speaking to a few people that think like us, that want to become some sort of an incubator of talent and just see what we can do. Not everybody can do everything. So, it's got so many pockets that needs to be filled. And if we can fill one, that's great, because you guys fill another,
Yeah.
And it's just an incredible experience now, especially in 2024. I've been living here for like over 30 years. And I've seen more emerging talent make it in the last 10 years than I've ever seen before. And I guess my aim is to try and create a community, which is what I said to you before on Show Studio. Try to create a community that can help young people that don't have the money, to push them to understand it's okay right now to not have the money at the beginning, because we can support you in one way or another, And I don't know, I guess it's interesting as well when you're dealing with a platform like Show Studio that has all the majors involved, like all the top end stylists, all the people that are doing everything that we watch and see on television to opening up a magazine. You have someone on that level who doesn't need to give back, but still enjoys the process and still enjoys the journey and still enjoys the moment of it actually happening and coming alive. I did want to also ask you another question. It's funny how I'm asking you because you're always asking me. This is really crazy. But I also wanted to ask you about how you feel when you do these panels with these young people who don't really have the experience of really understanding what fashion is. What does that create, I feel, as a vibe in Show Studio on the panel discussions? Because no one really talks about the ones that you guys slip in now and then. There's always one in that's kind of like, what does she know? But there's a reason behind that.
Well, I think one of the things that Nick taught me, which I always remember, I think he said it to me in my second week, was like, never assume that people know what you're talking about. He said something like that. But just like true. Never, assume that the person you're talking to knows nothing about fashion. So I think we never, whatever we're doing, it's, especially when it comes to the panels, it's never meant to kind of exclude anyone, or we want someone to watch a panel and come to it with no prior knowledge and be able to understand it and learn something. So I think it's always really important to have a balance of perspective and also knowledge. And I think that a little naivety sometimes is helpful because I think then you have, different perspectives, different levels of experience being able to inform one another because, you could give someone on that panel advice, but then they could also tell you the reality of kind of what's happening now, maybe why they're coming from that perspective. So I think that's kind of the thinking behind that, is to always have that kind of balance and a bit of, I think you've got to have someone to poke the bear a bit as well sometimes.
Exactly. Is there anything that you feel you haven't done yet that, as far as, like I said, the word support, that you haven't done yet that you feel is important for you to do now, or something that you'd like to happen that you can be a part of? How can I say that you can initiate?
I think in these kind of conversations we're having at the moment, we'd really like to do, I think Fashion Week as a whole has become, nothing changed after COVID and everything's gone back to how it was. And it's...
COVID was hell though, by the way. Yeah. Just saying.
Thinking in terms of kind of designers and again, coming to that idea of creative space, I think Fashion Week it's a really difficult space, designers and people come straight out of kind of uni and they need so much money to put on a show. It feels, I think more people have lent into kind of the medium of fashion film and doing lookbooks and things, but I think it still feels very linear and squeezed and hard. And I think something we'd really like to do is I'd really like to do is spearhead kind of moving those projects we do where we give people the studio into more of kind of a Fashion Week space where maybe it's more about kind of showing and giving the kind of resources to make those first kind of creative showcases and explorations. But, I think people squeeze themselves into kind of a runway show or a lookbook or something like that because they feel like it's the only way to go where you're going to be seen and you're going to have a platform and you're going to be noticed. And I think I think we're trying to do something where we can exist.
It's almost like a Show Studio Fashion Week.
Yeah, kind of. I mean, obviously, we do
or Fashion Week in the eyes, or the eyes of Show Studio, which would be dope.
Yeah, because we have like the panels at Fashion Weeks. We often have like a live illustrator, but I'd love to actually open that space up more to kind of like a designer, whether it's a designer shows and then we get some of their stuff straight into the studio and start shooting it and create more of a kind of. I'd love to do something like that, which is, giving them alternatives as well. I think that's really where my head's at the moment, is alternative kind of ways of thinking. And I think the system's just become so clenched. And, you know, I mean, I could go on a rant about the education system and the government and like the kind of funds and the focus given to the arts in general. But I think working especially on an online platform, I think I'd like to do more projects which show that there are more than one way of doing things. And
do you think that
really
that's
exciting.
something? Well, you think that could be something that can entice more more money coming in from the government, from the arts?
Totally.
Do you feel that enough money's coming in from the arts?
No, I mean, it's like they just cut it again and again and again, and you listen to the kind of minister, whatever they are, of education, kind of saying the arts, don't even bother with it, go and focus on STEM subjects, which is like science and stuff. And it's just like getting worse and worse, the general value given to the arts. So I'd also love to do a project which in some way could kind of maybe speak to that audience who aren't interested in the arts and show them how important it is.
Or how they need to be. Because I mean, for me, I feel that it's the arts that people come to the UK for.
Yeah. From
Shakespeare to Frieze to London Fashion Week. Like, you know, you can't sleep on this. Like, this is what the UK is about. I mean, that's why I'm here.
You walk around London, like you walk around Drury Lane with the theatres and then over and see the National Theatre, and then, you know, you walk through East London and it's all so many artist studios and designer studios. It's like, if you actually look around you in London and know what you're looking for, like it's an art city.
It completely, with no funds.
Yeah.
Completely ignored, with no funds, no help. It's as if, oh, it doesn't exist. Meanwhile, that's why people come here. Well, anyway, what else can I say? I can't believe you were here.
Thank you for having me. I feel very honoured that you asked us.
We had a minute just to sit down and, you know, water, coffee, and, you know, bitching.
Always. I'm always here for that.
Anyway, always a pleasure.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks so much for coming and supporting us at Hi-Fi. We are also more than thrilled and interested if there's any sort of a way to collaborate, to help out. We are here for you. And as I told you before, we are an initiative to help young emerging talent on their first presentations, you know, just to get the ball rolling for them and just to get them just enough attention to even attract Show Studio.
Sounds like a collaboration.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And thank you for coming. And we're very excited that Hetty came down.